Let's understand linear regression class over here. And let's understand the Python reason for why it is a class and not a module. So first of all, what is a class and what is a module? So as you can see here, there are some things like if you look at the metrics here, when we hover over the metrics, you will see it's module. But when we hover over the linear regression, you can see it's a class. And the reason it's a class is because it needs to hold data. So unlike a module, which doesn't necessarily need to hold data, a class can hold data. So you could have two versions of this linear regression holding different data. For example, the data we have here, this is the size of the house and the price. So this is the data that we have. And what we do is we pass that data to our model. So here, what we're doing is we're creating an instance of that class. So what it basically means, if you think about it, like a module is like a recipe book, but a particular recipe for a cake, and that is a class. The reason a particular recipe is a class or considered as a class is because you can make several cakes out of that single recipe. So from the recipe book, which is a module, in there are several recipes, and of the one recipe you use, that is the class. Basically, it lets you create, if you follow that recipe, it lets you create cake, and that cake will have its own taste, it will have its own size, it will have its own name, it will look different to any other cake that you make of that same recipe. So that's why when you then make that cake, it's stored in this variable. So a particular version of that cake, of that class, is stored here, and then you can, decorate that cake differently, you can change its taste and so on. So that's why the difference between a module and a class needs to be understood. So that's why, for example, here, this is a module that you can import certain functions of and use them without it having, storing the data. But with a class, you can actually store the data. So that's the difference between a class and a module. And that's why linear regression, because it needs to hold the full model. So it needs to predict the values based on the data over here. That's why it needs to store that data within its within the class. So that's one of the differences between a class and a module, is that a class needs to hold data and you can create multiple versions of it. So here we could have, for example, model 2, and that would have its own data. So you can then say, okay, model 2 will have its own data and it may have values of, P and Q, for example, whereas this one has the values for X and Y, which are these one X and Y, which come from over here. So that's why when you hovered over here, this is a class versus this is a module. So I hope this clarifies why linear regression is a class and not a module.